Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so excited to talk about this topic today. So it's the art of letting go. I think that everybody can benefit from recognizing the things that are holding us back. I think this transverses all the ages and stages because the things that are holding us back may be keeping us from living our best life. So I have a very special guest, Matt Hussey, who's going to talk to us about what he does in his therapy practice to help people navigate the art of letting go. With that, let's get to Matt.
Great to be here, Bryce.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about this super important topic. I mean, the art of letting go of things. It's hard.
It's hard. It's what my entire profession is really based on, helping people let go. So happy to share some thoughts.
Yes. Okay. So let's start with, I guess I'm interested in what interested you in this topic first. Like what brought you to this space?
To the therapy space or letting go
Yes.
space? Therapy space.
Well,
Oh,
both. Yeah.
sure. So it was probably my personal journey with therapy. So I started my own therapy in my sort of late 20s after my parents got divorced, and I ended my relationship at the time and left my job and had to leave my house. So all my kind of support structures kind of fell away. So I started therapy then and really went on this 10, 12-year journey into it. And over that sort of time, learned so much about myself and just therapy in general, and thought, I want to do this for a living. I was a journalist before, and I've built a few businesses in between and done lots of other things too, like carpentry and pottery and knife making and all those things.
Amazing. Yes.
And I really wanted to, what it came back to was really working with people and helping people. So that's sort of where the therapy world came from. And I started my own training, about 10 years ago now. And the letting go thing, that was really a major part of my own journey, was learning what I was holding on to, probably first and foremost, learning how that was affecting me and my relationships, my outlook, what I expected from the world, or what I think I was allowed to expect. And also then learning how to put it down, or learning how to hold things more lightly, as the phrase I like to put now. So it's no one teaches you how to do it. It's something that we have to learn ourselves. So that's probably a very brief summary of how I ended up
I
here.
love it. Yes. I mean, I think good therapists have done their own work, right? They come to the table ready to help other people and they want to help, right? And we're able to kind of hold other people's experiences and help them to see it in a different light. So it sounds like you came to this place from a really honest space, and that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's to your point about doing the work. If you're going to help somebody go to the deepest, darkest parts of themselves, if you don't know what that looks like in you as a counselor, how are you going to know what it looks like, or know when they are in that moment, and to know how that feels and what they may or may not need in that space?
Yeah.
So
So wise. Okay, so talk to me now that we've introduced you. Let's talk about this art of letting go. It can be so hard. What do you think? Why do you think it can be so hard to let go of things that are challenging for us, whether it's relationships or experiences or traumas or challenges? Why is that so hard for people?
sure. So I think there's two ways I like to answer that question. One is the kind of, what does the theory tell us from the mental health perspective, and probably perhaps my own experience of this idea too. So I think the most useful kind of theory in all this is something called the repetition compulsion, right? This was first discussed by Freud, back in the 1920s. And what he saw in his clients was they would bring the same problems again and again and again, or the same relationships, or the same frustrations again and again. And for him, what he thought what was happening there was something unresolved in the reason why it kept being brought back. It was the classic, Einstein quote, only an idiot does this same experiment twice and expects a different result, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what he looked at was what was the unresolved need in the thing that they kept bringing up? What was the relationship they brought up, or what was the behavior pattern that they kept bringing up?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been worked on and discussed by lots and lots of theorists over the 20th century and into the 21st. And something that I find particularly relevant about why it's so hard is because the things that we find so hard to let go, what happens with them is they become very familiar to us. The idea of like this constant thing in our lives. And in a strange way, we can build some of our core identity around that thing. So the idea of, let me think of an example, maybe being unlucky in relationships, or maybe feeling like we don't deserve love, or maybe the idea of being mistreated. When we experience those things, if they're not sort of given the right space and the right opportunity to be processed and reflected on, we sort of embed them into who we are, especially if they happened in childhood, right? And so when we embed them and we make them a part of ourselves, trying to let go of them often means trying to dismantle a part of what we call core beliefs. This idea that we think a fundamental part of who we are is that thing, right? Sure. And so it becomes harder and harder as we grow older, because there is a belief that life without it, we can't imagine what that life would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And also the familiarity that comes with that thing, removing it can bring its own anxiety itself, right?
Sure.
I don't know what life looks like without the idea of being unlucky. I don't know what life looks like without the idea of not getting a promotion or some other fundamental thing. So it's a real challenge, and the theory has looked at this for a really long time. And I think for me personally, why it's so hard is because, again, I don't think anyone shows us how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Shows us what we don't get to learn, what we hold on to. We don't get to learn what it is that's in our way. Is it an obstacle, or is it part of our identity, or is it something that enables something else? Like helping learn that language around describing the things that we're letting go can often be the biggest barrier to even just beginning to recognize the bits we want to let go of and the bits you want to hold on to.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up something for me that I read, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but somebody had said that, we all have a comfort zone, and it may not be a functional comfort zone, right? Like it might at one point have served a purpose, right? To keep us safe or to guide us through something.
Mm-hmm.
But at some point it becomes dysfunctional, right? Or it is not helpful in terms of where we're going. It becomes maladaptive. And so one of the things, so we have this comfort zone, and on the edge of our comfort zone is fear, because we're all so afraid to leave that comfort zone, because really our brain wants us to stay the same because it likes predictability and consistency and routine. And so every time we press against the edge of our comfort zone, we're scared. And that has helped me a lot to understand when I have that fear come up in me, that like maybe it's something that is not helpful, but it keeps me in this zone of feeling safe, even though it may not be the most safe or most healthy thing for me. And sometimes it is healthy and safe, right? Like I really want to skydive, but it also scares me. And so, for some people, they do skydive and that feels totally okay from them. But, it's that part of like, sometimes it is feeling unsafe. And then, but on the edge of that fear, once you get through the fear, is growth and freedom, which I love. That idea of like, we can expand our comfort zone and we can grow through things. But sometimes it feels scary to let go of what we feel is true about ourselves.
For sure. Yeah. And fear is a really interesting thing, because I think our understanding of fear is a negative thing, right? And I think you sort of touched upon that in a bit in your question. Yeah, fear is an adaptation, is an evolutionary adaptation, right? Fear is necessary to help prevent us from experiencing harm, right? If you think about it at its simplest, it's necessary and important, right? Fear is important. When it comes to sort of things like personal development, understanding the makeup of that fear is almost as important as pushing past it itself, right? So when we say fear, what are we really saying? Are we saying it's a defense mechanism? Are we saying it's a barrier? Are we saying it's a form of protection? Right? Because all fear is protective in its nature.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Don't touch that thing. Don't jump out that plane. Right. Because for very real reasons, there's a perception of danger there. So when it comes to sort of how do we move through or past it, we have to understand why it's there in the first place, and also to respect why it's there in the first place. A lot of the time when we talk about fear and breaking boundaries and barriers and stuff, we have to understand why the barrier was built in the first place. So we look at, take an example like leaving a job or leaving a relationship, right? Why we are fearful of leaving it is really important to be understood, right? Because we might be fearful of leaving it because we don't know what life might look like on our own. We might fearful of leaving it because we've never had to do certain things ourselves, or we don't know what the perception of us may be from others as a result, right?
Sure.
So, and they perform, if you look at them in a kind of skewed kind of way, a protective function in some way. So understanding why they're there in the first place, and therefore how can we work with them rather than destroy them, is really important. And it's very delicate work because sometimes those fears can become overdeveloped, and they come from things like traumatic events, whether conscious or unconscious. So we have to be sensitive around those fear barriers and be more curious to understand them rather than just the pure let's dismantle all fear and see what happens, right?
Yeah. Well, and I don't even know that we could. I mean, there's some fear that serves us a lot of value. And so we need it too, but it's figuring out which ones we're capable, right? Are safe, are, we're willing to push through, right? Or grow through. And then which ones are there for a really important purpose.
For sure. Yeah. And not to bang on about Freud, so I wouldn't call myself a Freudian, but he was what he found and what he wrote about was really instructive. So at the beginning of his career, he believed that humans were pleasure-seeking animals, right? That we only ever made decisions that based upon the idea of receiving some sort of pleasure or gratification. By the end of his career, he completely rejected that statement. And what he found is actually humans can and often do pursue things that are painful, pursue things that are wounding, that are trapping, that are all the things that we would look at today and question. And I think with things like fear, when I've worked with clients who come in to discuss a relationship that they want to leave, they may never leave that relationship. And so we have to be curious about why that is. What is it about the idea of I want to do something, but fear or some other reason is preventing me from doing so? The goal may not be to overcome the fear. The goal may be just to talk about it and just to go, I know it's there, I know it's a thing, but ultimately I choose not to.
Sure.
And with, breaking down boundaries and breaking down, barriers, as a therapist, the really, really important thing to always be mindful of is whose need is it to break down that barrier? Is it mine or is it the client's, right? And this is a piece of advice for anyone listening to this podcast with anyone in their lives who they want to help, right? You may see a part of their life and go, I think you should change that because I can see it hurts you, I can see it bothers you. If they don't agree with you, they don't agree with you. And with as much love and as much will in the world to want to help them with that thing, if they choose not to do it, that's their choice. And that can often be one of the hardest parts of working with this subject is wanting for someone to have something better that we believe is something better versus what they want.
Yeah. Well, and I find that's a good point to bring up because I find that if we want it more and we keep pushing it and they're not wanting it, whether you're a therapist or a parent or a friend or a partner, and then it often damages our relationship with them because we're pushing them towards a direction that they're not ready for. And then you have to do your own work about like what that means for you. But I think, we have to let people make choices in their life, which is really hard.
Well, that's it. And, you brought up the idea of parenting, right? And parenting is this sort of infinitely complicated balance between being a kind of holder and guider of their lives, and also an enabler of them and their own lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a unique challenge, but the skills you learn in parenting will be relevant and applicable everywhere, right? And
Yes.
and to your point, Bryce, about what is it we're trying to achieve or do for our children or any relationship that we maintain. We can want the world for our children or for our friends or for our family members, but the wanting of that can get in the way of their own sense of self, right?
Mm-hmm.
So teenagers are often the kind of big talking point for parents in
Mm-hmm.
therapy. Now, what was really important to understand is what those key years are really all about, right? So from a sort of personal development perspective, being a teenager in terms of identity forming is really about rejecting the old version of themselves and rejecting where they received that version of themselves to allow a new version to emerge. So the teenage rebellion idea, which has been written about since the 1950s, is a really, really important part of any child's life because it's them trying to formulate their version of who they think they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
That will often clash with a parent's version of who they think they are or who they think they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And the question we must always ask ourselves is, sure, we can see that what they might be doing might have negative connotations for them, either at that point or later on. But if we pursue that and try to correct it or try to remove the choice that the teenager is trying to enact on their own world, it can often destroy the relationship itself. It can often break down the relationship where the teenager stops seeing the parent as someone on their side and starts seeing them as an opponent that they must constantly resist.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's such a delicate balance between giving teenagers enough space to explore and to formulate and to reject parts of themselves that they may not want or like, versus how do we create a safe container for them to do that where they don't put themselves in sort of harm's way.
Yeah. So hard. I feel like even being a child therapist and going into this and knowing what I knew walking into this, it's so much harder as an actual parent than it is to, conceptualize that idea. And so my kids are challenging me on this, even though one of them is just walking into this teenage, adolescent space. And so, sometimes I feel like we're running into it.
Yeah. And that's it. And, as I work with adults mainly, and what they come to talk about is their parents, right?
Yes.
And how they got everything wrong. So it's the kind of, it's a really, really, parents often get the raw end of the stick for so much of this stuff,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And I think, my own personal journey, that was where I spent a lot of time, right, being very angry with my parents. But where I got to and where I tried to get my clients to is, can we look at the decisions they made and the behaviors they had through the lens of who they were at the time rather than who we are now, right? And that's a really difficult thing to do, because if we can see our parents as, the flawed human beings that we see of ourselves, we can give them a bit more leeway. We can give them a little bit more of a forgiveness were they trying their best? Did they do the best they had with the things that they had at the time? Versus, can I judge them over what I know and understand now?
Yeah. Wow, that is so powerful. So powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, okay, can you talk to me about, like, why do we want people, like, why is letting go of things that we've experienced? When we look at this in psychology, we know that there's a lot of things we need our clients to work through. I mean, they want to work through, right? Like, we help support them through that. But why do we care? Why do they care? Why is this an important part of having healthy mental health potentially?
Yeah, for me, it comes down to a very simple idea: it's change. I think the most important thing in therapy, and I think in personal development, is a felt sense of something changing. So whether that be how you respond to someone in relationships, whether that be how you respond to your inner monologue, right? Or how you respond to what you feel you deserve. We are not static things, right? And there is lots of incredible work done by researchers. I think of the Harvard Grant study as being the best example of the human's potential to change. And I think what we want for our clients is to feel that change, right? Is to show them that where you are now is not where you're going to end up. And the feelings that you have that dominate what you feel now will not always be so. And if we can help give the clients that sense of change and be able to show them, look, like when you came and started this work, you were here and now you are here.
Yeah.
That felt change is often the biggest motivator for them to keep going, right? To feel like you are able to change parts of your life that you do not like or you're unhappy with, I think is such an important thing. Because if you don't feel that, if you feel that the hand you've been dealt in life is fixed and static and therefore unchangeable, that can bring in lots of really, really difficult feelings like despair, hopelessness, a sense of I have no agency or ability to shape this thing that I'm in, so I just give into it. And all the horrible side effects that come from hopelessness and despair. We don't want that for our clients. You want them to feel that they have that agency and that have that ability to change, and that the change that they want in their lives is within their grasp. Right? It doesn't sit in me or sit in some diagnosis. It sits in them. And if we can show them that, and they can show themselves that they can do the change, then that's often all they need to go on without you, right? And for me, whenever I start with clients, the first thing I say to them is, when you feel like you have enough and you need enough from this experience to go, right? I don't want you here forever, because I want you to get what you need to be able to go forward. And so helping equip people with that knowledge and with that feeling of I changed something is such a valuable skill that I think everybody should have.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah. Okay. So if we're running to make a change, how do you feel like people can start in this process of letting go? What are ways that we can kind of walk into this? Maybe we have a therapist, maybe we don't have a therapist, but just like thinking about there's something we're noticing about ourselves and we're like, this could be different. Yep. Or, maybe we just have an idea. We see something that somebody else is living a life that we're like, hey, I want my life to look like that, or whatever it is that motivates that piece to think something could be different here. How can we start walking into this process of letting go?
Sure. So I think that you've already kind of answered the first bit of that question. I think it's the acknowledgement of it. Like, what is it that bothers us about our lives? The things that we feel we're holding on to or stuck by. And that's the first one. And that's often really, really hard, because identifying the thing, the sort of tangible thing that we feel that we're holding, can be very challenging, right? And I've worked with clients who come with this stuckness, but they don't know what they're stuck by, and they don't know what's causing them to feel stuck, and that can take quite a long time to get through. So the first step is recognizing what it is we feel stuck by or what's holding us back, and the second thing is learning how to talk about it. And it sounds quite sort of counterintuitive rather than the doing of something, but learning to talk about it is really, really important, because it's part of a unique thing in our species, and it's been written a lot about. It's the idea, if you cannot describe how you feel to another person and they understand, there is something uniquely rejecting about that experience. So if I was to give you an example, if I was to say to you, well, if you asked me how was I doing today, and I just went, right? You'd have no idea really what I was trying to say. And I would feel rejected in that sense of, you don't understand me and I don't feel understood. So learning to talk about the things that we're stuck by, and that being understood and played back or related to, or whatever it is, the interaction that we get from another where they go, oh yeah, I know how that feels, is a really, really important step. Because if we can't describe the thing we're trying to change to somebody else and they understand, that could feel like we're alone in this sort of journey. And that sort of second point really leans into the third point, right? It's just when we do change things, we need to change it, not just in ourselves, but with others too. Mm-hmm. So this is a slightly abstract idea, but I think it's really important. So if you think about who you are, your sense of self, there's a big debate about where that comes from. Now, some people argue that your sense of self is uniquely within you and just you. And some people argue that your sense of self comes from the relationships that you're in. I'm in the second camp, right? I believe who you are is developed in and lives in the relationships you keep. So if you want to start this progress of change, learning to talk about what it is we want to change, learning to be listened to be heard by other people, and then learning to notice when those people see us differently too is such an important thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can go and reinvent yourself, but if the world still sees you as who you were, have you really achieved that change? And so that sort of 3-step thing of recognizing, talking, and having the world reflect it back to you, that support that comes from the people in your life is mm-hmm. such an important step that often gets overlooked when we think about change.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, simple and yet so hard, right? Because I think, like you said, the art per se of identifying what it is, right? Because I think we might say, like I want to change my job,
sure,
or I want to change this relationship, or I want to change that I get so angry. Mm-hmm. But then it's like, okay, and like uncovering that part of like, why do you get so angry? Like, when did that start, and what did that look like, and what purpose is it serving you, and what are you using that as, and how does it serve you, or how does it not serve you, and what would having a different job look like, and what are you trying to change? And so it's really about, like you said earlier, about those core beliefs of self, and like getting down to the root, like, okay, why do I want to change that, and why does that matter, and what would that look like? And to get down to the root of really, why does all this matter? Like, why am I going to go through all this effort to get a new job? Why is this even, is it really about the job? Is it about, how I think people see me? Is it that I don't feel like, my parents said that if I was an artist, I would never be successful, or whatever that is. And so I avoided doing that, but I really want to do that. And so whatever the circumstances are, right? Like getting down to that root, we may not put a lot of time into that part. We're just like, I keep picking the wrong people to date or marry or whatever. And it's like, okay, there's something here, right? Mm-hmm. Like deeper than just that superficial part. So it's about getting curious, I think, with ourselves to say like, why does that matter too? So like that first part is so important. And then I think I love how you put the second part is to tell somebody, because undoing aloneness, we know that in the Harvard longevity study that they have been doing for a long time, I don't even know how many years it's been going. But they talked about having relationships with people is the thing that brings us the most joy and happiness and fulfillment. It's not money. It's not the job that we have. It's people. And so having people engaged in our life makes so much sense. And to also be engaged and welcoming them into something that we want to change about ourselves, or to let them know, to say like, hey, I realize I'm really struggling with getting upset. And then I, was thinking this kind of comes from childhood, or when I was bullied, or when whatever. And I realized that I've carried this over to protect myself. And then, working towards making a change and being conscious of that and the value or purpose that it used to serve maybe. And now that we don't need that anymore, and that we could do something different. Or sometimes we find, hey, I can't actually undo that. Like that is something that as I get closer to that, I realize I want to keep it like that. And there's something else maybe that I realize about myself that really is the thing that I do want to change. So I think that part of having somebody to talk through with that to get to the root is so important.
Yeah. And even just listening to you there, Bryce, like that exploration alone is so valuable, because in all of that, in all the what you just spoke about you're learning about you. Mm-hmm. And that is so important, right? Like because this idea of letting go and this idea of learning to change and to experience us in a different way comes from knowledge. I know myself. I know this of myself.
Yeah.
if we're not curious about ourselves and how we got here and how we got to the thing that we're stuck with, we will never truly resolve it, right? But that curiosity about that, to your point, like, I'm changing my job, but what am I changing? Is it how I'm treated? Is it how much I'm paid? Is it what skills I use? Is it where I live? Like, all of these questions are so useful and valuable, because, and I had a client just this morning who said, I wanted to change my job. And I said, but what is it about your job? And it was the fact that she had to commute for 2 hours a day. It was the idea that she had to leave the area that she lived in. It was the idea that she had a boss that treated her terribly, right? And I said, like, and so the big part of like doing jobs that we don't want is to learn what we do want, right? And I said, like, if the meaning of this whole experience that you've got in this job that you're doing that you hate is, I don't want to do these 4 things, that's valuable.
Absolutely.
That's useful. Yeah.
And I think that with dating too, right? I think oftentimes I find, so I see all ages now that I've been in this profession for, I think, almost 17 years. I don't know. It's been a while. Okay. And so, I see kids and teens and adults. And so the teens and adults, a lot of times when we're talking about dating, they'll be like, I just keep picking the wrong people. And I'm like, hold on. Can I shift your perspective for a second? And most of the time they say yes. And I'm like, okay, can we look at this? Like, you learn things about what you're willing to accept, what you're not willing to accept, what you want, what you don't want, what feels good to you, what's valuable to you, what things make you feel seen and heard and important to somebody else. And if you can take one thing away from any relationship, you've learned something to help you be ready for the person that you are to meet. And I think, that with a job, with parenting, right? Like, there are things that I know I was very lucky. I had my parents came very flawed to the table, right? We all do. But they did the best they could. And I saw that they did the best they could, and sure, they screwed up. But I think they really, truly tried their best. And I have to say that in this long practice that I've been in and lots of family that I've seen, I've never met a parent who's like, you know what? I really want to screw up. I really want my kid to fail. I really want to do something that hurts them. I don't see that. And maybe they're out there. I'm sure there are, but I have never met them. And I've worked in a lot of different settings. And I have not met parents who are like, my goal is to really hurt my kids. And so just to offer that out there to the world, whether it's teenagers listening or parents, or people who have been through things that, yes, our parents are going to screw up because we see them as, all knowing, I think. And as kids, we put that on them, but they're actually not, right? Because I am 40 years old, mom of 4, and I do not know all the things. And I am a child psychologist, right? Like, I know all of these things, but it's not that I am perfect in any of that. I may know it, but sometimes it's hard to, do it in my own life or engage it or, handle it perfectly. But I do think that there are things that I probably do that I know, like repair and those kind of things, to go back and say, hey, I didn't handle that super well. And I want to fix that. Or I want to know, how did you think I handled that situation? Or what could I do better? But, we're all flawed.
Yeah. And I think there's something that came up for me while you were talking there, Bryce, was, and it's something I've had my own therapy journey, right? Which is the idea that there is such a thing as perfection, right? That idea, I think, for me, is something that really became a bit of a stick to hit myself with, and to hit others with. And it's the idea that somehow there was some version of me, or some version of relationship, or some version of a career that was free from failure. And actually, where I've changed in my own journey, and what I try to bring to my clients is, can we accept that failure is the price of admission to this life, right? If we accept that for every relationship and for every pursuit and for every idea that we have in our life, that there will be some part of it that will be required to fail, mess up, be torn, whatever it is, frees us up a little bit. It gives us that little bit more space.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I try to help with my clients with is, if we're trying to achieve some sense of change, the idea that there's a single thread from here to that change means that like every single step either side of that line is a failure, right? But can we create as broad a horizon to a sense of change as possible? It makes success seem far more likely, right? And so with failure, if we see it as not something to avoid, but something to accept, it means that when we fall into it or we stumble into it, that rush to judge the failure rather than the making space for the feeling that we felt in that gives us means that we recover from failure more quickly, we learn more from failure, and we are more likely to try again because we've normalized the idea that we won't get it right. And that's okay.
Yes. I love this because I am trying to raise kids who are looking for the chance or like the reality that they're going to mess up, and that's just like part of life. Like you tried, right? And so you did something, right? And I think our society, at least in the United States, is so phobic of failure, right? Like we will paralyze ourselves to do nothing, to not fail. But then you do fail. I was talking to my daughter who just finished, she's 8, and she just finished her first season of basketball. And there was a game where I'm watching her from the sidelines, and I can tell that every time she gets the ball, she's passing it to someone else. Like as soon as she gets the ball, she is passing it to someone else. And I'm like, hey, I noticed you didn't take any shots today. And she was like, yeah, because I wasn't going to make any of them. And I said, well, how many of them did you make today? And she said, well, none. And I said, why didn't you make any? And she's like, well, I didn't shoot, so I couldn't. And I was like, And she goes, well, I guess I could, if I would have tried, I might have made one. And I was like, yeah. And you might have made 0. And that would have been perfectly okay. I'm okay if you do not need to be an all-star basketball player. I don't care. You're there to have fun. But I do want you to try, right? To take a risk, because on the other side of that is, in this situation, is nothing. Like you shoot, you don't make it, you're in 2nd grade. No one cares.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be happy. I'm just glad you're out there playing and having fun. But I think it'd be really cool if you tried.
Yeah. And also just to add on to that, right? Like recognizing that that was what was going on, right? For her, like the idea of going, like, can we encourage that self-reflection? I realized that I've changed the way I play because I'm worried about this thing. There's something really useful even there, right? In the learning of, I recognize that I am no longer playing the sport in a way that I may like to, and understanding why, right? So there's a kind of like, there's almost 2 sides of failure. There is the failure itself, and there is the aversion to failure, right? Yes. And they can be treated very differently. And so even recognizing that we have an aversion to failure is valuable in and of itself.
Yes.
And I remember a really good example I was given, which was, when you learn to tie your shoes, right? How many times do you think you tried to tie your shoes? And I said, oh, probably hundreds. And the person that was my supervisor, and they said, when you did that in front of a parent or someone, how did they respond to you doing it? And I went, oh, it's fine. They sort of showed me again, and I tried again. And I said, did they shout at you at any point? And I went, no. And I said, did you feel like you were a failure at any point? And I said, no, because I saw big kids tying shoes and I wanted to know how to do it. And so the journey of not knowing to knowing had to come through hundreds of different versions of failure, but again, the failure was never used in the experience. So I was allowed to move through this experience at my own pace, and I remember going to secondary school, high school here in the UK, where we wear uniforms and we have ties, right? Learning how to tie your own tie.
Yes.
My God, like that seems like rocket science when you first watch. I used to watch my dad do it. But the idea of like, how do we acquire skills, right? Through multiple attempts of it not being right.
Yes.
And the aversions to not getting something right and learning what that's about, and helping soften that judgment that we have, that internal critic that arrives in childhood, can be so useful and valuable, because it helps make a bit more of a gentle approach to our own experience. Right? We can be critical, sure, because we want to get it right, absolutely,
sure,
but can we do that and try at the same time?
Yeah, can both be true.
Can both be true. Not that it's a move from either or to both and.
Yeah, which I love.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I don't love it because it's used as the way I have to grow.
Yeah.
But it's very valuable, right? Like I'll be like, okay, can both of these things be true? And I'm like, yes. One person can feel one way and I can feel this way, and we can be feeling differently about the situation or whatever the circumstance is. Okay, so sometimes I see in my practice, and I wonder if you see this too, of like people who are suppressing their emotions, and they say, I've let that go. Right. So it's like, or that doesn't really matter to me. Like, and you can tell that they've like thrown it in the closet, right? Like it's back there. So is there a difference for you? I know that I obviously have a bias. I've just expressed my bias on this, but do you think there's a difference between letting go of something and suppressing an emotion?
For sure. There's the way I'd kind of characterize it is the energy and maintenance to suppress something versus the energy and maintenance to accept something is wildly different.
Yes.
So if you were to look at that example that you gave there, like, to avoid something takes a lot of conscious thought, right? And also the defense you have to build around that thought is the defenses get higher and higher and higher with time, right? Because what inevitably happens is you could be minding your own business in your everyday, and then something comes along that looks a little bit like that thing that you're trying to suppress, and you have this really, really strong reaction to it, and it seems completely disproportional to what it was. That maintenance that you have to go through to keep that thing away from you is so high at that point. Versus the idea of, if you've accepted or let go of something, you can allow it to exist without that huge energy exertion to kind of deny its existence. And I think that for me is the key difference, because if you spend all your time avoiding something, it doesn't leave a lot of room for anything else. And I find a lot of clients that I work with who suppress things, they don't have much room for anything else. They don't have much room for playfulness, for Esther Perel's eroticism, the act of being in a sense of play with another. Creativity, you'd be able to project into the future, to imagine different ideas for themselves. They all get diminished when we expend all our energy on trying to stop something or prevent something from happening. And when that turns up in my client work, what I say to them is, like, I hear exactly what you're saying. I get this, that you don't want to talk about it, and that's fine. But just to let you know that if any point you do want to talk about it, we can. Because there's something, like, especially in therapy, I'm sure you find it as well in your practice, is when we get a whiff of that suppression, we run after it, right? We go, say some more about it. Let's stay here. Let's explore this further. But when they say don't touch it or get away from it, that's there's something to be learned there too, right? Which is, are they losing control of those defenses, right? Are we breaching those walls without their permission? And so that's a really subtle difference between that, like the suppression and the avoidance.
So What do you think, like, so when there's obviously value, or like I've talked about this part of like adaptive versus maladaptive. And there is something adaptive sometimes about not processing through something.
Sure.
And then there is times where maybe the cost of keeping those fences up, right, are becoming too high.
Yeah.
And I think, we talked earlier also about how we can want somebody to change, but they have to want that peace. So when you see somebody, and I know I have thoughts on this, but like, using substances, right? Or, they're choosing risky behaviors, and not necessarily talking about teens in this, like these are adult, independent functioning people. I think our responsibility to our children is different when they're young. And so, but when we see an adult that's in this place, is there something that we can do to support them in maybe being willing to work through that stuff?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And I think for me, what comes up is judgment, right? Because so often when I've worked with people who have eating disorders or substance abuse, there is an incredible sense of shame around the thing that they do, right?
Yeah.
And that needs to be really honored and respected when we tread into those spaces with these people. And I think for me, for anyone listening to this who may have someone in their lives who is reaching for substances or whatever it is to cope with what they're going through, is to know that they do it mostly because it's how they've learned how to survive.
Yeah.
Right? Whatever they're holding on to, whatever it is that's troubling them so deeply that they rely on something like that. And so approaching them with a sense of I want you to stop it, but I understand that you may need to do it for some time before you're ready to stop, right? Is there's a kind of non-judgmental acceptance in their choice.
Yeah.
Because so often what happens, especially in sort of substance recovery stuff, and you see it a lot, and there's a really good example, there's a great study that looked at anti-smoking advertising. And in the UK, and I'm sure it's very similar in the US, anti-smoking advertisement. So in the UK, when you buy a packet of cigarettes, there's a horrible picture of someone's throat or lungs. They're all blackened, and they look terrible. And it says, smoking kills, or smoking harms your children, or very, very severe messaging. And when a group of psychologists went looking at how effective that was, they found it actually did the opposite effect. It made people smoke more. And the reason why it made people smoke more is because people reached for cigarettes as a form of relief from something else, right? So obviously there's the addictive qualities of nicotine and the kind of relaxing effect that nicotine has, right? They reach for those as a way of coping with something else. If you put this very shameful thing alongside that thing, and you say like you're killing yourself by doing it, that just amplifies the need to soothe that thing. So they would just do the thing more. It's the same with eating disorders, and people who struggle with their weight. If you go up to them and say, that thing, that what you're eating or how much you're eating is making you fat. If you think they don't know that, you're misunderstanding what's happening for them. They are doing that thing to cope with something far worse in them. And if we're not willing or interested or curious about what that far worse thing would be, we never get a chance to help them. We never get a chance for them to feel accepted, or so much about addiction and so much about struggles with self-regulating comes from a place of shame. And if we just tread all over that and go, you're terrible because why can't you just eat better, or not smoke, or not do drugs, or not drink too much, you're just pushing them further down that hole, right? And you might be doing that with the best of intentions and love, but understanding that what they're looking for in that moment is not judgment, is understanding. And I believe that with most forms of abuse, substance abuse, given the right conditions and the right space, they will come away from it on their own. Right? The right support, they will naturally see it as less vital for functioning, and they'll learn to sort of step away with it gradually in their own time. But judging them for doing it in the first place often doesn't. It won't get them any closer to that.
No, and I think again it impacts your relationship, right? So it's like, and I know that people would say like, well, the substances are getting in the way. We don't have a relationship anyways, but you do still care if you're wanting them to withdraw from that substance, right? And so recognizing that, yes, it's hard and you may have to make different choices for yourself about how frequently you're around them or what that looks like for you. But we can't make anybody do anything, right? Everybody is in charge of themselves.
They are, absolutely. And this is, I talk a lot about in my own work, invitations, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you come and talk to a therapist about your mother, right, and why is your mother behaving like this, right? You can only ever invite her to take part in a discussion about what that is. If she doesn't believe or see the world the way you do, it's really, really hard. But we have to learn to accept it. Mm-hmm. And it's even harder with things like substance abuse, right? The idea that you can see the harm that it does, and they probably see the harm that it does them too.
Sure.
And we can invite them to want to take part in their own recovery, but if they choose not to, they choose not to. Mm-hmm. And there's a great tragedy in that. And I used to do work on like Samaritans, which is sort of like a suicide hotline in the UK that kind of works 24 hours a day. And what you find most of the time when people are engaging in high risk behavior is because they just want someone to notice. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they want people to notice so they can reject that.
Yeah.
So they feel some sense of agency, right? When someone pays them attention and says, "Why don't you stop?" It's so that you can say no, but I'm in control. Mm-hmm. So there's such complexity.
Finding some power. Yeah.
Lots of people who have suffered from substance abuse feel incredibly powerless in their lives.
Yeah. Well, and it's, your body is craving it, right? It's not just, and we're trying to mask something, right? Like it becomes, a coping skill and an addiction and right. And it's all in the same thing. And if you don't know how to handle the other things, the anxiety, the nightmares, the lack of sleep, the whatever is happening without it, just taking it away without giving skills would be so incredibly difficult. I don't know how. I bet there's not very much success. I couldn't quote a statistic on that, but to remove the coping skill, even if it's an unhealthy coping skill, and then give no new skills, right? And there also has to be the want, right? The desire to make a change. Okay, we touched on this a little bit before, but I am curious about, like, I find that a lot of adults are perfectionists, right? Or wanting to control at least, right? Like they have very high standards for themselves and everybody else around them, sometimes including their kids, right? And so how can we learn to embrace uncertainty, right? And this part of, or can we trust the process of letting go? I hear people like say, trust the process, right? And that's on my side very hard. I'm a recovering perfectionist, thanks to Brene Brown and her amazing words. But I think, talk to us about this. What do you think about this part of perfectionism and control and how we can navigate that?
Yeah, and I think it talks a bit to what you said before, Bryce, about the idea of going kind of cold turkey, right? And I'd say perfectionism has the same problem. To go from perfect to non-perfect in a single step is impossible, right?
Yeah.
And I think I think it's talked about a lot. It's talked about a lot in mental health circles, right? The need for perfectionism, and I think we sadly live in a culture where it is celebrated, right? If it's the perfect score in sport, or it's the perfect grade in education, or it's the high reward in a salary, right? There are lots of yardsticks in life that are very simple to understand and therefore very seductive to use. Not trusting the process is to believe in a yardstick that you can neither see nor feel most of the time. And that causes incredible dread, because you're asking a person who has lived in a world where those very visible measuring sticks, how much you earn, what was your education like, and what will be those versions in your social circle. So whether it be like, are you married? Do you have children? All these sorts of things that you see and feel every day, and they're exerted upon you in some way. To try and create a world where that does not happen is, without you going and living on a mountain in a monastery, right, is impossible. And so again, for me, the perfectionism thing is not about like living without perfectionism. It's about accepting that it's just one option of many. And sometimes we need to feel those good parts of us that we've spent all our lives cultivating, right? So it might be our ability to multitask, it might be our ability to run very fast, whatever it is, right? To see them as absolutely okay in the right context, but also to see and to understand the need that we may have to have different approaches in other contexts. So the thing, a really valuable lesson I learned in my training was, the best of you is also the worst of you in the wrong context, right? So if you think about perfectionism, in the right context, so it might be wanting to create an amazing meal, or wanting to have a lovely home for your children to grow up in the right, that's a lovely one, right? And we have to recognize that the drive to be perfect comes from a really important place. What we need to try and do is introduce other versions of that too, right? So it's my need to create the perfect dinner, but alongside it is with the idea of, but is the perfect dinner sitting down with someone that I love and having 2 hours to talk? Is the perfect dinner, making sure that I have no other distractions? Is the perfect dinner, and is to create variations of the drive. So it's really, again, it's that broadening of the horizon about perfectionism, right? The need to want something to be good is important, and we want things to be good. We want to see that we can do good things. But can we broaden what that is? And can we broaden what working really hard looks like? Can working really hard not be working 16 hours a day, neglecting all other parts of our life? Can it be doing 8 hours of one thing and 3 hours of something else and 2 hours? Can we give ourselves that flexibility to create different versions of that goal that don't always lead to this very, very narrow point of success and failure, almost like a binary yes, no, you succeed or fail, right? And you see it in things like New Year's resolutions, right? It's a classic one. I know we're a bit later in the year now, but if you think about New Year's resolutions, they are often singular goals. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to read 100 books. I want to do these sorts of things. Success is so narrow in that vision that all other versions that aren't that would be considered a failure. Whereas a different version of a goal could be, reading more. Can I read more than I did? Can I lose some weight rather than an explicit amount of weight? And I think that can be useful in this discussion around perfectionism, is about, why do I want something to be this way? And are there different versions of it that are more reachable, more achievable? And can I, again, to go back to where I started with the idea of talking about it and including people and bringing other people into this exploration, can I get some reference points? So if my version of success is, I don't know, like, an immaculate household, but my partner or someone else says, that's not my version of success. My version is that you get to do the things that make you happy, the things that you enjoy, the things, and so that, again, it's to socialize the problem. You can often find out way more about what other people think about you and how that can be very useful, just to help modify the thing, not to remove it, but just to renegotiate it and make it a bit more flexible, a bit more fluid.
I love that. Thank you, Matt. This has been such a fantastic conversation. I've so appreciated it.
You're very welcome. It's been great to be here.
Thanks again, Matt. That was all really helpful information. I know that I'm leaving this conversation with some things that I'm going to implement in my life, and I hope that you are too. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time. Please like and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and share us with some friends too. If you think that this information could be helpful for them, please share it with them. With that, I will say have an amazing day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.